I've been freelancing for over 20 years, and I can tell you one thing that I've really observed among friends and colleagues who've dabbled or tried it or stayed in it or not. The thing that determines whether you'll be successful is the extent to which you're able to treat it like a business and really understand that you are running a small business. And the challenge here is you're doing everything. You're doing HR, you're doing contracts, you're doing pitching, you're doing negotiations, you're chasing paychecks, you're getting the insurance, you're doing all this stuff. You have to do all of it. You're doing every single job in this company. And on the other hand, having this small business is nice because as a business of one, you don't need a ton of work, right? You need just enough. So there is that. I don't want to be too down on it. But you really have to have a varied skill set. And I think I went to the University of Santa Cruz program. This was eons ago. But, we never learned. I think most people in journalism school don't really learn about this business aspect of it. And there's a whole thing, I had to learn, how do I write a business plan? And I've been putting on workshops now for many years for freelancers. And it's basically the business of freelancing. That's all of this stuff. Because you really should, and you may even want to consider, if you're looking to go into freelancing, taking some classes in the business school that are about this sort of the business side of things. But what I want to talk about tonight is really the importance of community. And so, you're running this business, you're doing it alone. It can be really lonely. And the other thing that can really happen is you just get so inside your own head. You don't have perspective, right? You don't have, when you're on staff, you have all these colleagues, you have this shared purpose. So you're working on this project, right? And there are other people in the room who know about it and understand. As a freelancer, you're alone, you're deep in it, particularly if you're doing a bigger project that you're really invested in. Presumably you have a great relationship with your editor, and that's someone that you can talk to about it, but that's it, and your editor's probably busy. And so it's really important to build yourself basically a set of colleagues. And so it's different when you're a freelancer because it's not going to be the same kind of colleagues that you would have on staff. But I think there's kind of sort of some subset of people that you want to be able to have. And I kind of like to think of it as almost building yourself a kind of board of directors for your business. So, on the one hand, you want some people that are really going to help you with the business support stuff. So find some folks that really understand, talk to Yesenia about business plans or budgets, things like that. You want to find some people that are good at this or that you can talk to and share ideas. And some of this is also just saying, how do you do this? How did you navigate it? I'm having trouble finding affordable health insurance. How did you do it? Do you have advice? So another kind of person that you want is for idea development. So some folks that you can just bounce ideas off of. You have this idea, you think it's good, but where should you pitch it? Does anyone have any ideas? Do you know someone that can give you the contact of someone? Because so much of this business is about relationships. In fact, I would say that relationship building is even more important. I mean, you have to do good work. And as a freelancer, as Yesenia was saying, it really, you can't afford to do sloppy or bad work. But you also have to get the assignment, and so much of it is really about these relationships. And I came up in a different era. I don't want you to go look and see at my bio and say, oh, I'm going to just emulate Christie, because things are so different now. When I was starting off, I was working for magazines, which used to be really thick. They would have 200 pages sometimes in a single issue. And, it's a different world now, and so things have to be different. But find people that are peers that you can work with, who have ideas, who have contacts. When I was coming up in magazines, one thing that would often happen, this is going back to the idea about relationships, is I'd be working with an editor who I really liked, and that editor would move to another publication. And you know what? I wouldn't stop working for that same publication. I might move on to a different editor at that publication. But meanwhile, now I'm writing for this other magazine because my editor went there. And you will find that that editor-writer relationship is sort of sacred, and that's something, your relationship is with the people rather than the publication or the media company. And particularly now when things are so volatile, they're so much more volatile than they were when I was starting. It's those relationships that are going to sustain you, and those relationships that you build with colleagues, with peers, but also as well as editors. And I'll just mention here too that there are freelance editors too. So there's work in editing. That's another thing that you can consider. But again, it's these relationships. And so you really need to be thinking about that. Another kind of relationship, another person you want on your board of directors, is someone or someones preferably that can really help you with sort of the existential angst of freelancing, which is not just about freelancing, by the way. I think it's the condition of being a writer. In fact, I have a dear friend who's been an editor. We started off together, and I kind of went the writer route, and she became an editor. And she said that 90% of her job as an editor is just managing anxiety and angst among her writers. And I know, I'm like, yeah, that's me, But having peers and having folks that you can talk to, and again, it's about getting yourself out of your head. You're working on the stuff, you're very alone, no one else knows what's going on. Sometimes you run into problems, your editor's not calling you back or not responding, and that's really stress producing, right? And so having some folks that are just there for moral support is really, really important. And then another type of person that you want on your board, right, is someone or someones who can be accountability partners. Again, writing is so lonely, and you're sort of, no one else knows what you're doing. And a lot of the stuff, if you're pitching or you're developing an idea that you haven't found a home for yet, it's really easy to put that off or to just keep doing the stuff that's kind of coming to you. But very often what happens in your freelance business is you'll get to a place where you have work that's coming in and people that are assigning you stuff, and that's really good. I call this your bread and butter work. You really need to have sort of an ongoing source of income. So you want to find some ongoing work that's pretty easy, low stress, enjoyable, and sort of has a good amount of money that's coming in. I like to think of it as like, I need $1,000, where am I going to get it? And I used to have, this was like 10 years ago, it's $1,000 rule. I wouldn't take anything that was less than $1,000. And unfortunately, the situation has changed now a little bit where that's not always the case. But I think a better way to think about it is a per hour rate, and thinking about how much time and energy are you going to spend, and also how long is it going to take to get paid? A lot of the work that I do are sort of bigger projects. I'm doing more features now, and it can take months and months. I mean, it can be 6 months from the time you get the assignment to when you get paid, or more, and that's a long time if your mortgage is due, your health insurance is due, and all of that. So you need to have some of that ongoing income. And so looking at that, but I think having this sort of board of directors, this community of people is really, really important for keeping you sane, but also keeping you grounded, and also, helping you to sort of figure things out, because new things happen and the industry is changing so much too. And I think that's another reason it's really important to have a support group and a community of people that are doing similar work to you, so that you can share ideas. And sometimes there's things, so right now there's all this stuff going with AI. These AI companies have stolen my work. I have 2 books in this database, this lawsuit that's just being settled now. And so, we're all talking, like, what are we going to do about this? And having other peers that I can talk to, other book authors, where we're all going, okay, what do we say? What did my agent say? What did your agent say? What did your publisher say? What did my publisher say? It's just crucial that you have that. Okay, so how do you find this community? Where do you get it? There's a lot of places you can go. I feel like it's actually a lot easier now than it was when I was starting out, because there's so much stuff online. People are so online. I mean, you can find these things now, right? On social media, there are a lot of Slack groups. Just being in this program, you're connecting with peers now that will help you, and you can be part of it. And I'm sure that your instructors in the program can help you find individual things. But I think the other thing that I've really found, so I live in rural western Colorado, kind of in the middle of nowhere. My husband and I have a winery. I live on a farm. Like, I'm really kind of in the boonies. And when I first moved out there, I had been living in Boulder for a long time. And when I started freelancing, I was in Boulder, and there were a lot of other writers there. It was great. And then I moved out to this rural area, and there was like no one. And I was kind of lonely with the writing friends and all that. And so, I didn't have the community, so I decided to build it. And so I started having these gatherings at my farm, bringing in other freelancers. We called it the Creative Convergence. And they would come, and we would camp on my property and just talk shop for a weekend. And it was great. And it grew, and I had multiple iterations of it. And it grew into some business of freelancing workshops that I was doing. But that was really like, I saw a need for myself. And so instead of waiting for someone else to do it, I did it myself. And I think, if you build it, other people will come. And, just finding those folks. Another thing that I'll say is that I think it's really important to have, so you want peers. So you're already going to be graduating with a class of peers that are kind of at the same level, the same career stage as you. But I think it's also really important to kind of have and seek some aspirational friends, people that are just a little bit ahead of you, and also some mentors who are more ahead. So when I was starting off, I was really lucky that I befriended this woman named Kathy Dold, who was awesome. I was living in Boulder. She was living in Boulder, and she really taught me a lot about contracts. She had been freelancing, I think, for like 10 years at that point, and I really looked up to her, and she was just a very generous person. And I think most freelancers are generous. I think sometimes there's this idea that it's getting some weird feedback. Huh? Oh, that could be. Is that better?
We're getting feedback from
Yeah, the L. Okay, I think it's better now. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Oh, really? Oh, that would be awesome. She's amazing. Anyway, but she was so generous, and I think sometimes there's this idea that it's a zero-sum game, and in some aspects, I mean, it's not untrue, but I think it's more true that you help and you be helped, and I think it's really we need to help each other. It's overall, I don't think it's a zero-sum game. I think there's work out there for people who are good, and I'll tell you what, so much of what happens is, someone offers me an assignment, I don't have time for it, I'm booked, and so I give that editor a name. And so I have given and received a lot of work through word of mouth like that. So these communities are really strong. If I have a good relationship with an editor and they trust me, they're going to trust my recommendation and vice versa. And so look for some people that can be mentors. And then when it's your turn, be that mentor to someone else. I think it's really important to just have that community-minded mindset. If you have the mindset of like, oh, everyone's in it for themselves and you can't share, I think that's a really toxic mindset, and you end up losing. Like, you gain so much more by being generous and sharing than by trying to keep everything to yourself. That's just not going to help you. And then another thing I want to say is I think it's also kind of good to find some people that are kind of doing things like you want to do. So when I was kind of very early on, my first few years, I was writing for some places like New Scientist. I started very early writing for this magazine called Health Magazine, which in those days was actually a really nice magazine. It was one of the ones that really gave me my start. What else? There are a couple of others. And there was this woman, Mary Roach, who just was awesome. I loved all the things that she wrote about were so cool. And I never really got to know her at that time, but we were kind of writing for some of the same places. Our editors, we would talk about her. And I was like, oh, I want to see what she's doing. And oh, she's writing for this magazine. And I was like, oh, maybe I'll pitch them, because I saw that she was doing that. And so it wasn't so much that I was copying her, but it was like I was seeing what was possible by sort of looking and following what she did. And then at some point, she got this contract to write this book, which became stiff. And we were all like, oh, my God, she got, I think she got a nice advance and everything. But it was really neat. And so, she became a very successful author. When I was flying out here, I was in the Tattered Cover bookstore in the Denver airport, and they had an entire bookshelf in front that was just Mary Roach books, and I just thought it was so cool. I have nothing to do with her success. I barely know her, but I just feel like this is so cool, and like this is what's possible too. And I think that's how you should be really thinking about it, not with envy to your colleagues, but with possibility. Like, wow, that's really cool. If she did that, maybe I could do. And looking at like, how did she do that? What was the pathway? And again, I think, this industry is changing so much, so I wouldn't go back too far. Like, don't try and do what I did because it's so different now, but look at people that are just maybe one level ahead of you and see what are they doing, how are they doing that, and maybe you get to know them a little bit. But yeah, I think that those relationships are really, really important. I think there's also this idea of just really having that accountability with folks. So I run some workshops on book proposals, and part of the reason I decided to start these workshops is that writing a book proposal is one of the loneliest things you'll ever do. And in fact, it's incredibly difficult. It's very typical that it will take people a year, years oftentimes, and even people who've already written a book. This isn't like unique to your first book. The reason is that Well, there's many reasons. The first reason is that you're coming up with this idea. Book proposal is actually a lot of work. They can be many pages long. To really sell a book well, you need to have an overview, chapter summaries, usually a sample chapter. Some agents, in some circumstances, they may even want 2 chapters, sample chapters. So you're basically doing a ton of work with no guarantee that you're going to get paid. There's no deadline. No one else really cares that you're doing it. You may have internal doubts, like, is this really a good idea? Have I framed this correctly? And so it's sort of the big, ambitious thing that you're doing that has no deadline, and so it keeps getting put on the back burner. So you're freelancing, you're working on this book proposal. Oh, you got another assignment. Okay, wait, I'll work on this next week, or the week after next, or maybe it ends up being. And so you really sort of have to have some kind of accountability and support. So I started holding these book proposal workshops as basically kind of like a peer support group to help people who are working on book proposals. These are six-week workshops, and we would go through, and I'd have guest speakers. But the main thing is basically having people, commit to, okay, so next week we're going to do this, and you need to submit to the group. And now you have a peer group who's helping. You're with peers who are also good writers and whatever. They're giving really helpful feedback. These aren't people you're taking from off the street, right? They're people who have valuable feedback to give, and you're really supporting each other. And I think that's really valuable. And that's another thing where it's like, build that. If you are working on a particular kind of project or doing something, like, look for other people that are doing that. You can create these communities, and they're so supportive. I've had a lot of books now that are coming out of these workshops. It's so gratifying to me because I'm not doing any of the work. I mean, I'm not doing anything. All I'm doing, though, is creating this atmosphere and this community where people can support each other. And I think that peer support is so important, and it really helps you get across the finish line and get there. And it's also really nice to get sort of a reality check. I have my most recent workshop finished up a few months ago, and they're still meeting, and people are still sharing their work and getting ready, and a couple of them now are getting ready to have their agents send the proposals out, and there's the whole step of getting the agent and all that. But just having other peers who are sort of in it with you a little bit, because otherwise you're just all on your own, and there's this sort of cycle of angst and cycle of existential anxiety, right, that can happen when you don't have those peers. And so I think it's just very important that you create that peer network and that support group, and finding the kinds of people, and also, really taking time to assess, what do I need right now? What am I lacking? Like, how can I be helped? And also, what do I have to offer to other people? Because it does need to go both ways. It can't just be so transactional where you're looking for someone, and occasionally I'll have someone contact me where they're like, tell me what you did, or like, I want to do this. And it's like, no, it can't, it needs to be a supportive two-way relationship. And that's true even of people, I'm very happy to help people that are just starting out and whatnot, but there's sort of this supportiveness that needs to be there. And I just really encourage you to try and build that and to look for that. And it's something that will serve you, whether you're freelancing or doing another, if you're working in a staff job, this can also be part of it. And I have had a staff job, and I'll tell you, some of my former colleagues from that staff job are still dear friends and some of my best support networks and work wives and all of that, so it's really, I think, in some ways, the thing that's going to get you through this career, not just freelancing, but just the whole thing is having that network of support and building it.
Christie, thank you so much. That
You're
was
welcome.
really inspiring. We should soon move on to the Q&A, but I do want to just spend a few minutes chatting up here a little bit. Yesenia, I'm curious about what your kind of community looks like, how you've built your freelancer support network.
Yeah, I really love the point you made, Christie, of sort of like creating space to give and receive, and like making time for folks. Early in my career, I had a lot of mentors who would get on the phone with me when I had questions about a story, or like, I was still figuring out what editor-writer relationships looked like, and the anxiety was so real. And so just like having someone that I could call for reassurance was so impactful at the start of my career. And now I'm at a point in my career where like there are, you know, younger folks. Like I taught at CUNY Newmark a couple years ago, and I still have students who reach out sometimes like, I want to pitch this story, but I don't know like what outlet to send it to, or you know, can you help me? Or just sometimes they just want to meet just to like talk about the industry at large. And it's really important to me to make time for specifically like young journalists and student journalists. I get a lot of emails from especially like journalists of color who are just starting out and want to figure out what it's like to be a Latina in this field, a queer person in this field, you know, child of immigrants in this field. And my writing is very political, and so people, I think, feel curious about what it's like to build a career with the voice and like a slant, so to speak. And then I have my friends, you know, I think like what you were saying about like community ultimately is friendship, you know. I have a group of girls, we call ourselves like our climate girlies. I helped launch the Uproot Project, which is a network for environmental journalists of color a couple years ago. And so a bunch of us who helped launch it are still really close friends. We've made even more friends through the network. And we have like our group chat. Most of us are in New York. So like once every quarter, we'll get together and like go do karaoke, and like we invite each other to our parties. Like our partners all hang out now. Like when we have kids, I'm sure they're all gonna be buddies as well. And it's just like we're friends, you know. Like we text each other when we're stressed out about work, but we also text each other when there's drama at home, you know, with the boyfriend. And it's really special. I think that it's really, I think that that's actually one of the most important things, whether you're freelancing or on staff, like just being a journalist right now. Probably every moment journalists need to have this community, but especially right now. And for someone who covers like environment and climate, if I don't have my friends to lean on, I don't know how I'll be able to do this work, because it's heavy, you know. And I think all beats these days feel very heavy, but it's not easy to be a journalist, you know. It's a very emotionally intense job, with like the expectations of the workplace.
Well, the media our work's under attack right now, and I think it's really hard. And I have a lot of friends in my network too, where sometimes you just need someone to talk to about how bad it is and how hard it is, and you know, it can feel sort of futile sometimes too. Like we're getting the stuff out there and it's not making a difference, and this is hard, and having that support network is really important.
Yeah, I mean, there's no way to do the work without it. Like I think you said, like to stay sane, literally.
Yeah.
Like it couldn't be truer.
Mm-hmm.
So that really resonated. I think everything you said, I
don't want to pick on anything, but I want to go back to something you were saying about liability and indemnity clauses. This is something that's really important. Those indemnity clauses, you need to really fight those. There are better versions, and this is something where having a good network and asking people, and a lot of these publications will have better indemnity clauses. You should not sign a contract that's putting you on the hook if someone the only reason that you should ever have to pay legal fees and all that is if you've done something wrong, and that's proven. Otherwise, that publication should be, you know, covering you for that. And this is also true of books and things like this. And this is also why a lot of these publications too, you know, they'll have legal reviews sometimes of stories, because it's their butt on the line, and it should be theirs and not yours. So it's something to really pay attention to, particularly right now, as you said, when, you know, it's a really hostile environment.
Yeah, and I completely agree. I also recognize that sometimes you just need the job, and pushing back is not always a fight people wanna pick, but I wholeheartedly agree. And there are some clauses, some agreements out there that are just so great. They're like, we bear responsibility, we're here with you. And, you know, I write a lot for Yale Climate Connections, and like I love working with those folks. There's like really great editors and outlets out there, but there should be a lot more.
Yeah.
I'm curious from both of you, because this is something I grapple with. Yesenia, you mentioned like figuring out your pace. How did you figure out your pace? And is your pacing for work different as a freelancer than it was when you had a staff position?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, when I was on staff, I was writing like 3 stories a day sometimes, you know. Like my job before Atmos at Earther, I was like up to 3 stories a day, with like 1 feature a week, maybe like 1 big story every quarter. That's like a big feature. The pace was intense, and it's because that was just the culture, and it was what you needed to do. But doing that long enough, I realized that is not the pace at which I am at my like optimal self.
Yeah.
And I recognize that I can work faster if I need to, you know, and I've been working long enough now where I have a sense of if I need to get something done, if I have like 24 hours to write a story and all my reporting is done, I can do it. I don't like to do it though. It's not what I enjoy doing. And I'm talking about like, you know, like 1,500 words, not like a massive piece. And so I think it's just like practice. You know, you have to sort of get into the habit of writing enough to figure out what makes you happy, at what point you get burnt out. And now I know that if I overburden myself and take on too many assignments, I will be quite miserable for a couple of weeks. Like right now, I'm in one of those phases where I took on way too much work because it all came at once. And I struggle with saying no when it's good work that I actually want to do. And so I've been like working late, you know, to get it done. But then I have moments where the work is so slow and I have like a week where there's not much to do besides things that I want to do, like maybe look at grant applications or like start putting some feelers out, like more like low stakes work. And so I'm happy to have a little bit of an ebb and a flow. But it really takes, I think, throwing yourself out there and like trying to get a sense of what your limits are. And I don't know that you can figure it out without like doing the extreme stuff and seeing how you feel. Because some people really thrive, I think, in like the fast news-paced environments. And some folks like myself really like to take their time. And there's a way to do both, I think, and still be like happy and successful.
Okay, last question for both of you, and then we'll break out into, small groups. But how are you guys setting your rates? And then how, once you've set those rates, do you stick to those rates?
Yeah, I'll start. I really try and set my rates based on an per hour. You know, so most, not all, but a lot of the stuff that I do is per word. Yeah. And when I started around, I would love to say this, around the turn of the last century. Yeah, I'm old as don't want to say what I was going to say. I'm very old. But I was told that you should never work for less than $1 a word. Right. And now I talk to young people starting out and they're like, oh, it pays so well. It pays $1 a word. And I'm like, oh my God. And so, you know, that per word rate may not be the best way to do it now, not just because rates really haven't risen. I mean, they've in fact dropped significantly since I started, and part of it is just the nature of the work. And, you know, I was starting off in magazines, which back in the heyday used to pay a lot more than they don't really exist in the form that they did then now. But I think the best way to do it is really to be looking at your time. And so it's like, how much time are you going to put into the reporting, but it's not just the writing of the story, but also, you know, the whole process. Some outlets, it takes a lot of work just to get the assignment. So maybe you write a pitch and then you wait and then you have to maybe revise it a little bit and your editor's going to take it to meeting or something like that. Or maybe it takes a really long time to get paid. And so there's kind of that whole factor. Because again, what you really want is a mix of work. You want stuff that's coming in, that cash flow stuff, and then you're going to take some projects that are going to take more time like that. And so finding the right mix of that, I think, can be challenging sometimes. And it's something that you kind of learn over time. But I think the most important thing, there's a couple things, but one is you have to sort of figure out the minimum you can take. So you should not be taking work that's paying you so little that it's just you're basically giving your time away for free or you're losing money, because not only is that bad for you, it's bad for everyone else too. You know, every time you agree to, you know, like you should never work for free, right? Unless it's for Last Word on Nothing, which is the best place to write for free, right? But that's a group science blog that I'm on, and we write just for ourselves and just for fun. And I do think actually it's really important to have a creative outlet that you do. I also, one of my podcasts, Emerging Form, I do with my best friend, and we truly just do it for fun. We actually do make a little bit of money at it now. It's taken us a little while to get there, but we really just do it for ourselves and for fun. And I think it's really important. It really enriches my life, and it bleeds into the other work that I do. Because when you're writing for money, sometimes you're not writing all the things that you want to, and you need to have some things that are for yourself. That's important. But the final thing I'll say about this, going back to rates, is that so often I will hear people say, well, you know, I wanted to ask for more, but it's my first time. And I'm like, no. Like, you are setting your base rate, and you should always, always negotiate on that first assignment for a couple of reasons. One is that maybe it doesn't work out and they're terrible and you're never going to write for them again. And so wouldn't it have been better to be getting paid more the first time? But the second reason is that that's setting the base. So if you give in the first time and take a lower rate, then you have to get a raise in order to get what really should be your minimum rate. So I think, it's a little bit, maybe, I guess one slight exception would be when you're very, very first starting out, maybe the very first thing you ever publish, maybe don't negotiate so much. But once you have even just a tiny bit of experience, I mean, some of this is really, I like to think of it as you are teaching these folks how to treat you, and you're sort of setting rules about what's acceptable and what kind of behavior and what kind of treatment you will accept and you'll take. And this is the same thing too. Sometimes you'll take an assignment and you agree to a rate and an amount, and then it turns into something much, much bigger. And then it's appropriate to go back to them and ask for some more money and negotiate things. And there are different ways that this will happen. Sometimes they'll just increase the rate a little bit, or they'll give you a separate extra fee. But this is just sort of like you every time you say yes, you're saying that's okay. You can treat me like this. This is acceptable. And so I think it's really important to set that from the get-go, that you're a professional and that you deserve a professional rate.
Yeah, I think the point you made around like setting a minimum and sticking to that is the most important thing. Everyone's rate will vary depending on that budget, right? That's why like having your budget is really important. You need to know how much money you need to make that month. When I first started doing freelance, I thought of it this way. And I don't know if this is the best way to think about it, but this is how it helped me, is like, if I need to make $8,000 a month, how many stories do I need to write to meet that? And so let's say I'm charging $2 per word. In the ideal world, that's where I start. I start at $2 and I work my way down. The lowest I'll go is $150. Anything less than that, I'm like, no, thank you. Unless it's like a nonprofit that I'm like, you know what, I like you guys. I'll do this because like I genuinely appreciate the mission. But that's like once in a blue. Like maybe once a year I'll do something like that. So if I want to make a certain amount of money, how many stories do I need to write at this preferred word rate in order to do that? And is that actually feasible, like with my time? Is it better for me to do like a bunch of short stories versus a lot of longer stories? That's how I first started thinking about it. And now that I'm at a point where like the work is like steady, it's working out, but I do think you have to figure out what is that word rate or hourly rate. I think hourly rate is a smarter way of thinking about it.
Hourly is much better because the per word, I mean, there are stories you could just pop off in very little time, or maybe I only have to interview 2 people. That's much different than a story that could be a similar length where you interview 8 people.
Exactly.
And there's a lot of back and forth. And the other thing is, it's funny because the length of stories and assignments have gotten so much shorter than when I started, but it's actually, in a lot of cases, and probably most cases, harder to write short.
Yeah.
I mean, there is that old quip, right? Like, I would have written this shorter, but I didn't have time. So that's why I think the per hour rate is really the way to be setting rates rather than the per word.
And it's not necessarily like that you're telling your editor this, right? Because the editors sort of determine what the standard will be in terms of if it's per word, per hour, but you yourself are doing the math to know, is this going to be worth my time? Like if I'm doing a reported essay or like an essay that requires no reporting, $500, it's not great, but I could write that in like 2 hours if I really wanted to, right? And that $500 of my hourly rate is $150. I'm getting more than what my hourly rate will be, right? And so trying to figure out, it's like little calculations you have to make for yourself. But setting those rates and sticking to them is really, 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 really important, especially early on. I think what you were saying is like you're setting the standard, and the more of us who stand our ground and say we will not accept this, the more editors are forced to pay us all better. Which, will the industry get more money to actually be able to afford that? I don't know, but it's up to us to make sure that we're not getting paid less than our worth.
Great. Well, Christie and Yesenia, thank you so much